Chomping at the bit to get going. They've been up here for a while, so can everybody get in and sit down so we can start the discussion for panel 2? As we had mentioned earlier, we're having our second panel for the day. Our final panel for our session today is going to be focused on aging transmission, affordability, and resilience. Just continuing on part of the affordability theme we've been hearing throughout the course of the day, but also the needs to build more transmission infrastructure. So this panel is going to discuss how the grid can support AI and electrification and growing demand needs while staying affordable and resilient. So they have all the answers for this difficult problem that we've got going for us. I've got Ben Lance, who's going to be moderating the panel. Ben, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. You can do the introduction for our panelists and get us started.
Thank you, Larry. So when Larry and I were visiting earlier this year, talking about affordability, which is, of course, a huge conversation in our industry, we're also talking about our aging grid. And I wrote up a little abstract, and he hit on a couple of points, but I just want to read that out to you because when we were talking as a panel, we were putting these ideas together, this really formulated. So there was a poll put out by Public Utilities Fortnightly, and they asked regulators and industry executives about the challenge. Well, actually, they polled them, what are your challenges coming up? What are the things that you are focused on? And there were very clearly, we noticed that in the poll, there was competing goals of really the national goals of AI and electrification objectives while maintaining a resilient and affordable grid. So our industry typically claims that assets live, maybe depreciation's over about 50 years, and yet we're replacing less than 1% of our assets per year. So I heard it today a number of times on stage. I'm going to reiterate it. We really have 100-year assets. I mean, let's not fool ourselves. We're not replacing them soon enough. We're depreciating them perhaps over a certain period of time. But we've got this 50-year gap that we really need to be thinking about and communicate. And that's where some of the questions are going to come along. And what we want to talk about is what are utilities doing to not only upgrade capabilities, but maintain resilience or upgrade resilience to achieve these goals so we can free up capital instead of replacing aging infrastructure to go do those things that we want to do with AI and electrification. So on the stage here, we have a great panel from different views of the industry. We have Ray Guilford with an organization, now actually it's a law firm, focusing on supporting the industry, giving advice and representation in energy. That would be Wilson Barker in Nauer, and he's out of Colorado, and his past experience is with being a regulator as well as an assistant attorney general. So great perspective from a policy standpoint. So we have the policy and regulation point of view. We have Jose Villalba with Osmos, which is a service provider providing services to extend life, capitalize life extension of services. And we also have Vandan Devita with Eversource. Many of you know him because he's been a longtime supporter of wires and has been on many panels in the industry. Now also working as a vice president there at Eversource. And I know that you have a lot more to your background, so I'm just going to give you a quick moment to introduce yourselves, a little bit about yourself, and just comment on this challenge of balancing the affordability of our aging infrastructure with the new initiatives to build out for AI and electrification. First, you, Vandan.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, everyone, still. Vandan Devatia, as Ben said, I'm a vice president at Eversource. I'm in charge of transmission policy, interconnections, compliance, and business development. I've been at Eversource 23 years now, been in various parts of the organization, from operations, project management, and my current roles, which spans those areas. This is an interesting problem we're dealing with. I think you've heard the general theme. We're kind of at this point where the grid needs to grow to meet these kinds of demands. The last time I saw this kind of a growth was actually a couple decades ago, right around the blackout of 2003, when NERC standards became enforceable and we needed to start building for N-1-1. Folks may recall that we started to really start building transmission for multiple contingencies. We had these lines that had sag limitations, and the vegetation resulted in one of the biggest blackouts in recent history. And I think today our challenge is twofold. One is, how do you meet the growth in demand while maximizing the existing system? And then when you superimpose that with an aging infrastructure, you're dealing with this trifecta of problem statement. And on top of all of this is this value paradox from our customers. They want more for less. Affordability is front of mind for them. So how do we balance all that? And we can get into some of these conversations. We're constantly managing how do you rebuild the existing system while increasing its capacity? How do you maintain that infrastructure while adding new circuits and new transformers to meet strategic load growth? So happy to get more into it.
Yeah, thanks for that overview. And Jose.
Good morning, everyone. Jose Villalba, Senior Vice President with Osmos Utility Services. We are a big player in the infrastructure inspection of structures and life extension of structures, both distribution, transmission, underground. And I'm very passionate about this problem. I think it's going to take all of us working together, both the utilities, the regulators, the contractor community, and really thinking outside the box. I like to use the toolbox analogy. We have a lot more tools in our toolbox now than we did 15, 20 years ago. We've got obviously the replacement approach. We've got the life extension approach. We've got advanced conductors. We have undergrounding. We have all these different tools in the toolbox that weren't there before. So it's our responsibility, in my opinion, to understand those and to educate the industry and our consumers and be really selective of what to use when and where, because I think there's an optimal solution to this problem.
Thank you for those opening comments. And Ray.
Yeah, hi, I'm Ray Gifford. I'm one of the saddest and most tedious things in the world, which is an old regulator. More pertinent to this discussion, for the last 12 to 18 months, I've worked with a group called the Western Transmission Consortium, looking at the unique transmission challenges in the Western Interconnect, the interior West. And I think part of what we have to recognize at the outset, in a room in Washington in particular, is that the transmission challenges are at one level national, but a deeper level very particular to the regions and the areas you're in. So they're different in MISO and PJM in the Northeast than they would be in the West. In the West, we have very distinct challenges, being A, we don't have very much transmission to begin with. B, the states are very large and square, which means you got to go a long way between load centers. And C, we don't have the coordinating functions that, say, an RTO might have, or the large power pools you have in the Southeast. So on one level, we have national transmission challenges. On another level, we have very particular regional challenges. And in part, maybe the spice I can add to this soup is to talk about how what we call the cowboy markets are trying to solve their interregional transmission challenges.
I love that. I mean, when we put this panel together, thinking about the differences between the Northeast and the West, and then, of course, Osmos operating across the country and even a couple different countries, observing what's going on from an aging infrastructure standpoint. So we have great visibility here to a number of different challenges and regions. So I want to turn our attention to the definition of life? You know, when we say end of life, when we think about our transmission structures, I think someone would argue somewhere around 20 to 30 million transmission structures that we have in the United States. And of these, I've seen some reports saying 30% are, I think it was the Bank of America Institute that put out a report, it was a Yahoo Finance article, saying that that the reality of these assets, 31% of these assets were beyond their useful life. Well, you know, what kind of language is that? And what is the definition of useful life, and how are we determining that? So I'd like each of you to consider, when we're thinking about useful life or end of life, how are you as a utility and a service provider hearing that, and from a regulation standpoint, and then your current role, how are you thinking about that, and how do you determine what that definition is?
Yeah, I can start off. You know, what we don't do is determine it based on its birth date. We actually monitor the health of the asset. We try to deploy strategies to extend the life of the asset, and Jose can talk a little more about how we're utilizing their services to do so. But examples like coatings on steel structures to prevent corrosion, cathodic protection on underground cables to prevent corrosion, monitoring the gases of our transformers, because the transformer will tell you how it feels if you just listen to its gases, and other strategies like flying drones every 2 years throughout our circuits to determine what is wrong with it, combining with IR imagery. So how do we determine life? It's really based on the health of the lines or the substation equipment.
Health and data.
Health and data.
And just from a utilities perspective, when someone gives a life, and when you hear reports saying that our infrastructure is, if it's over 25 years old, that it's nearing its end of useful life, is that particularly useful to a utility when you hear reports like that? And where do you think that basis is coming from? Is it the actual condition, or is it somehow like an accounting practice?
Yeah, I think it's sometimes useful because at some point when the asset is so old, it either needs replacement or some refurbishment. So it's pretty intuitive to know that as the age of the asset gets larger, there's some investment that's needed. The question is, what exactly is it that you're going to do with the asset? I mean, our team made a presentation this morning to our planning advisory committee at the ISO, talking about a line that has 83 structures. Most of the structures are 72, 73 years old. And we gave the stakeholders two alternatives. We said, alternative one is replace 34, actually specifically 41 structures that are in need of immediate repair, and we recommend that you need to replace these structures at this point based on our assessment and inspection. And then there are other structures that you're going to pass by or are going to be in that zone in a couple years. So alternative one is just a targeted replacement. Alternative two is replace everything, but when you replace everything, you can string new conductor that will double the capacity of that line, and you can put new OPGW that prevent significant reliability issues and improve communications. And I'm curious to see how this goes. I don't have a clear answer because it needs to go through an independent asset condition reviewer. We've added more process to these kinds of, in my opinion, no-brainer decisions. However, let's see how it plays out, because it would be interesting to see if the stakeholders believe we should spend less now to spend more later, or spend more now to reap all the benefits.
And I love that you're jumping already forward to some of the solutions, but and so we'll come back to that. But Jose, what are you seeing across the country, and perhaps even in different countries? What are you seeing from a definition standpoint when you go and talk to utilities? What are they saying from an end-of-life standpoint? What's the numbers that they're giving, and how are they determining that? And then how would you recommend that they do that?
So good question. I think there's potential misconception that there's some sort of, born on date expiration. So whether that's 50
birthday
years,
kind of
birthday,
problem,
60 years,
yeah.
70 years, and it varies throughout the country. But I like to think about the problem separating the equipment from the structure. So if you park the equipment to one side for a minute, if you think about the
And
structure.
equipment, you mean what? Arresters?
All of the overhead
lines,
equipment,
okay.
the conductors, everything else. So it's
Insulators.
just park that to the side for a moment, because that whole field is developing very quickly. But I think if you think about from a structural perspective, there's really three things that could impact the life of a structure, right? It could be corrosion, it could be fatigue on the structure, or it could be an external factor. Let's say a wildfire goes through, or a combine decides to back into a tower. Nobody here has seen that before. Mm-hmm. So if you have a proactive assessment program and you understand the health of that structure, you can make intelligent decisions on where to invest and extend that life, arguably 100 years plus, right? I think if you do not understand the health of your system, then you start to shift back towards that 50, 60-year mark, I think.
So you're saying that's pretty much an artificial date?
Absolutely, and it's going to vary based on your environment and your conditions.
I just
and
wonder if
everything
some
else.
people kind of put their career life onto equipment or something. I wonder if there's some kind of myth in the industry. Well, I'm going to be here for 30 or maybe 40 years. If I think people move on quicker these days. But is it a generational thing? The equipment's going to last as long as I live, or are we really thinking about the true health and condition of the asset? And what you're saying is that obviously we need to be thinking about the condition of the asset, but I'm just curious, every good myth starts with some truth. Where is the truth coming from, and where do these numbers come from? And I've heard from accounting, I've heard from people sticking things to the wall, and somehow the 30, 40, 50 year comes up on all the different assets that I've been involved with over the years, and I'm not certain that there's a lot of science to it. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. I think I would also challenge that we have more data at our fingertips now than we've ever had. And I think our decision making today is very much data driven and should be data driven.
Right.
So how would we not challenge those perceptions from the past, right? There should be data to back up your decision making.
Right. So Ray, I want to get to you and I'll also hear that perspective from your regulatory experience and even your visibility now.
Well, and to start with, you just have to assign an asset an accounting life and use that accounting life to calculate your revenue requirement. And you do the best you can there and get it roughly right. I do think events actually drive some of the way we look at end of life or age of assets.
What kind of events?
Well, I mean, I think every Western utility executive that I know read Catherine Blunt's California Burning, both called their transmission planning department and their equipment auditing division and said we need to check every tower to make sure we don't have assets from the 1890s sitting somewhere on a mountainside. But wildfire liability, particularly in the West, really drives a lot of thought, and I think there's been, for very good reasons, much more proactive work in the West on making sure your assets are, relatively speaking, more fire hardened. In talking to utilities and developers in the West about building transmission in the West, the two issues that are first and second out of their mouth are, one, wildfire liability regime and wildfire issues, and two, federal lands and permitting, both of which I can relate back to our overall topic, which is if you can avoid federal lands issues, you can build more transmission, or if you can accelerate those. And if wildfire liability is going to be ruinous to the developer or operator of a line, nobody's going to build the line. Pretty easy, right?
Right. Well, go ahead, yeah.
Talking about the life of the asset, there are a couple other factors that have come into play in our case. on the protection and control system, technologies are evolving. So we may have deployed a technology 20 years ago, but because of the way communication systems are evolving and relay protections are evolving, that may be obsolete. Look at your computer. So in certain parts of the electric grid where it's very technology focused and not steel and structural focused, the life might be shorter. And it might just be due to evolution of new technologies or losing key manufacturers. We are also dealing with determining the life of an asset based on its risk to the supply chain, where if a critical manufacturer for an equipment is going out of business and that's the only one that's making something, we're going to need to be prepared to have a plan B on failure. Either get spares while they're in business or start moving away from that technology. So that's one. And then I would just add one more to the life is, in New England, we've started to see like woodpecker infestations in certain pockets or a certain bug within the trees that made those trees starting to rot more. And if you had wood poles, you had similar infestation in the wood poles. So there's environmental and supply chain driven events that are completely independent of civil engineering fundamentals and electrical fundamentals that make us think differently.
Right. So I'm hearing events, right? We've got stressors such as environmental stressors, obviously. We've got material deterioration, the actual measurement. We've got supply chain. These are realistic, but what I'm hearing is a resounding rejection of the 50-year life. That is what I'm hearing from all of you, is that's really quite artificial, and we really need to be thinking about these assets in much longer terms. But I'm also thinking is, should we be communicating that up front to the public to say, these are 100-year life assets, and we're investing in generations to come. And this is an opportunity. We're working off of the investments from previous generations, and well, we've had the benefit of overbuild for many years, many decades actually. And now, someone said it earlier, the bill is up. The time is now to upgrade. So that's obviously our challenge. And Ray, I heard you last night, you mentioned something that I want to quote. You said, existing corridors are a gift. Having that existing line is a gift, and the corridor is a gift. And thinking about what can we do? What can we do? So now I'm talking about solutions, right? I want to start with you, Ray. Thinking about solutions, how do we use existing corridors as a gift? And we can touch on capacity. Obviously, we want to talk about aging systems and resilience, but capacity is a part of how do we squeeze more out of what we've got, and how we think about those corridors as a gift. You first.
Well, again, I think once you have the right-of-way and the corridor, you've got a lot of opportunity without going through the laborious development phases of reconductoring, double circuiting, adding another circuit. If you look
the permitting,
and if you look at the major projects that are just now coming online in the West, I'm thinking of Sunzia in New Mexico. Their right-of-way is large enough they can build a second line.
Okay.
So those sorts of forward-thinking things, and to segue to the other part of our topic of affordability, I think that's the real additional challenge, because hanging out as I do with state regulators, which is a great rocking group to hang out with, they're on the front lines of seeing the affordability issues that are coming straight at them right now. And if you look at the reporting on the New Jersey governor's race, for instance, the number one issue up there is utility rates, right? And I think that's not unique to New Jersey or unique to PJM. I think a lot of states are looking at having the life cycle of current assets running out, A, demand growth, B, and in states particularly like mine with ambitious carbon mandates, those costs are coming at those state regulators, which means ultimately at those consumers in a hurry. And that has everybody very worried, which on the transmission side of the story and the regulatory narrative is we need to be able to tell a story that says we're not just building for the next century to help your children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, but we're going to help you save net power costs now, even though things are going to get more expensive, which is still a really tough story to have to tell, because you can ask governors, you can ask legislators, how to lose a legislative race or a gubernatorial election is have a soaring utility rates.
Good point. Jose, building on that, and really from a life cycle cost of being able to avoid perhaps some of the massive decade-long permitting that we've unfortunately experienced, what are some of the solutions that utilities are using to get more out of their existing lines or to capitalize or to extend life?
So it's a really good question, right? And I think it goes back to the toolbox analogy that I opened up with, right? And you really need to think about the system as a whole and the line as a whole. And let's say it's 100 structures on a line, and maybe you have a river crossing or something complex like that. So maybe that span that is a river crossing span, you would potentially strengthen those structures and maybe use alternate conductors on that span, right? And then maybe other segments of the line you could.
So advanced conductors that are lighter for that long span?
But you would pick and choose when and where, right?
Okay.
Where it made sense. Maybe that's one way to utilize that toolkit. Another way to do it would be to proactively use life extension coatings or cathodic protection, and then you're extending the life of those towers that are in service, going back to leveraging the right-of-way that's existing, right? So how much more life could we get out of those structures? And then there might be some structures that you choose to upgrade or replace, but intermixing all of those solutions in a kit is absolutely the way to tackle this problem. And that'll let you extend the life of those existing lines or upgrade those lines while you spend your capital and planning on the new lines that have to be built. So you're dividing and conquering versus throwing all your eggs into one basket, if you will.
And when you say upgrade, you're talking about capital upgrades? How frequent is it that you're able to capitalize these kinds of?
I would argue that any life extension should be a capital expenditure, whether that's you're strengthening the structure, you're hardening it, you're upgrading it to take it more load, or you're installing a restoration solution to address mechanical damage or corrosion below ground line or fatigue damage, right? When our team engineers a restoration solution, we partner with the utility and we say, do you want this restored to 100% capacity, or do you want this restored to 120% capacity?
Okay.
What is your future plan, right? And then maybe throughout that restoration process, we're addressing an immediate problem, but we're creating reserve capacity for a future growth plan.
Okay. Well, Vanden, you've had a lot of experience in the North. You have a lot of old infrastructure compared to what they see in the West. What's been your experience with upgrading lines? You've had operations experience in the past. Tell us a little bit about your experience.
Yeah, and I go back to Commissioner C's comments this morning is, we're not just fixing reliability issues of today, but we're ensuring readiness for tomorrow. So right sizing is a very important component of maximizing the existing rights of way. At the same time, utilities, and many people in this room appreciate this. Yes, we have an opportunity because we have existing rights of ways, but we also have an obligation to serve our customers and make sure that we have solutions in place so the lights don't flicker, right? And not just for today, but for tomorrow. So we have numerous examples where we can look at an existing right-of-way, and let's say 50% of the structures need immediate attention. And our assessment is we've done everything we can to extend the life of it. They're at 70, 80 years at this point, and they need replacement. Let's say the other 50 don't need immediate replacement. But you're going to go to structures 1, 3, and 5. You're going to replace them. You're going to pass 2 and 4. You're going to do the matting. You're going to call the homeowner. We had this discussion this morning. You're going to have the conversation at their breakfast table, and you're going to call all these people to say, hey, I'm replacing structures 1, 3, and 5. And then 2 years later, please, I need to have breakfast with you again because I'm replacing structures 2 and 4. And I need to remat everything, and I need to make sure turtles 1, 2, and 3 are safe while I'm doing that. It's crazy when we start breaking this apart on how inefficient it is to break up a system into multiple segments. Alternatively, you right-size it now, you replace it now, and you get immediate speed to power benefits of increased capacity on the transmission grid. So one of the ways we are approaching this is, whether it's underground cables where we're replacing high-pressure fluid filled with cross-linked polyethylene,
Right.
or we're replacing some of the old structures with new structures, we're constantly going back to the ISO or to our local system planning groups and saying, does this line show up in your 20, 30-year needs assessments? Does this line show up in an interconnection study, or is there general interest around this circuit? And if so, let's go to the stakeholders and get approval for upsizing it.
So I'm also hearing that if you're going to make upgrades, you really need to do a good job with the assessment and make sure that those upgrades are actually going to last for a while, right? Because if you're going to capitalize it, there needs to be a depreciation. So just back to you, Jose, what's the typical depreciation cycle once you've done some upgrades? Do people say, well, these are good for 5 years or 10 years, or what's the typical cycle?
Of a capitalized life extension
Right,
solution?
right.
It's at least 10.
At least 10.
We've seen folks
Okay.
go higher than that, 15 up to
Okay.
20,
All right.
but 10 is probably a good rule of thumb.
Right.
And one other thought that I failed to mention earlier is, if we do find a priority condition, let's say, one solution that's out there is a transitional restoration solution, so that we could put up a transitional restoration and buy the utility time to replace, whether that's a 6-month lead time on a tower component or poles
supply
or equipment.
chain, right.
That there's this myth that you can go out and replace tomorrow. I mean, that's true if you have it in the yard, but that's not always true, right?
Right. Very good.
So there is that factor too that has to be engineered out, if you will.
I appreciate that.
We actually delayed the replacement of a transformer in East Springfield by 20 years by just
that right?
performing, basic inspection and refurbishment of it without creating a significant outage disruption as well.
Fantastic. Yeah. And of course, that's there's all the more sensors, and and we haven't really touched on capacity because we're really talking about resiliency here, but there's lots of techniques of increasing capacity and so forth, and it's something we need to continue to think about. Appreciate all of your comments. I want to make sure we have time for some questions here, and then I come back for closing comments with each of you. Are the mics available for questions from the audience?
We do have them. But again, I'm going to exercise executive director privilege and start off with the first question. And then I'll open up to others. I actually want to turn back. You touched on this somewhat, Vanda, but I'm curious to hear a little bit more, and maybe what some of the others have perspective on, the impacts of supply chain on the assessments of aging infrastructure, how that's impacting your decision-making process. If you could talk or elaborate a little bit more about what that has been doing to the internal review and the process for going about replacing aging infrastructure when you can't get things for maybe 5 years or more out. How's that?
Absolutely, and I'll engage the audience here. Who wants to take a wild guess? 345 kV circuit breakers, what's the lead time? 200 weeks. 115 kV circuit breakers, 120 weeks. You're talking 2 to 4 years of a lead time on certain circuit breakers. Underground pipe type, high pressure, fluid filled cables, single manufacturer called Oaknite.
Right.
They actually sent us a letter 5 years ago, someone can fact check me, that they're going to go out of business And we said, holy cow, we've got hundreds of miles of high-pressure fluid-filled cable feeding the most important city in the New England region. We got to spare up. And as we get aging infrastructure issues, maybe switch to cross-linked polyethylene because that's widely available. So those are just a couple examples. When we start looking at lead times or single source contingencies from a supplier perspective, we start creating programs that eliminate that. It's a combination of spares in the near term and transitioning to a different product in the long term. And it's going to be over 10, 15 years, so it's not going to be right out of the gate, and the cost impact is not going to be seen by customers immediately because we'll stagger it over a long period of time, but it needs to become a part of our integrated planning function.
And I appreciate you bringing in some of those other assets and some data for us to think about. I know that others have experienced the same thing. And my background is actually in underground transmission and distribution. So when you're talking pipe type, I've done a lot of research in that area, and those are quite the systems, quite complex.
Yeah.
A lot of moving parts, a lot of maintenance required to maintain those systems. Thank you for that. Any other comments?
I'll be a little puckish, Larry, and say that in the West, if we can cut permitting and NEPA review time in half, we won't have any supply chain problems because that's our blocking function for transmission in the West. We could order a 345 circuit breaker and still have 5 years left of NEPA
the new
reviews
stuff
and
anyway.
appeals.
But if it fails, that's a different question.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Stranded costs problem, but that's a different
Right.
one.
Okay.
So I was just curious, when you're talking about trying to be innovative and trying to have these novel solutions to try and get the most out of the grid that you possibly can, with the concept that you have to be aware of your supply chain and the amount of suppliers that are going to have this kind of equipment and technology for you, how do you balance how prolific some sort of technology needs to be with also trying to be innovative and taking advantage of those novel ideas?
Yeah, I generally am inclined towards innovation and a startup culture, but I've been a utility executive 20 plus years, so it's a constant conflict. Utilities rarely will go with serial number one of any technology. We've deployed STATCOMs about 15 years ago, and we found issues and we had to fix them. Now STATCOMs are, you can buy them at a grocery store. I'm exaggerating, but it's widely available. Many equipment suppliers. So I would say I think we are still going to remain conservative when it comes to brand new technology that hasn't been tested and could have implications to the security of the bulk power system. But if it is if it's software driven and can be deployed in parallel with real-time operations, like can you take PMU data to measure the performance of the system to avoid tripping of inverter-based resources inadvertently? And can you do that in parallel with the real-time control room without disrupting the control room? And will that help you make certain decisions on how do you invest in other parts of the system? I think we're more open to parallel processing and bringing on new technologies. I'm speaking for Eversource. There's a lot of utilities in this room, and happy to hear others' views as well. But that's one way we think about it in terms of solutions that Jose's company is deploying. Some of these are no-brainers. Using cameras to get IR data on the heat map of a substation, using certain equipment to kind of listen to the gases of transformers. Those seem safe. I think we're more willing to try monitoring equipment that is just bells and whistles to help us gain better indication of the system.
I will also add, I think we're in a global interconnected world now. So we should be open to, what is somebody else doing that may have lessons learned for us and leverage that as much as possible. There may be some countries that are more advanced in some of these solutions than we are, maybe less risk adverse. So what's working there and what could we bring across potentially? I think that's one other way to tackle your question. And then challenge ourselves to, work with data. Let's do a pilot, prove it out. It may work, it may not work, and if it does, build it out. So those are two other comments.
Well, and let me critique my tribe of regulators, which is utilities don't innovate because we don't want them to innovate, right? The regulatory toolbox we have is very static and doesn't want them to take risks, so they don't take risk. And how we're going to meet the hyperscaler challenge, the AI challenge, how we're going to meet the transmission challenge is getting everybody to kind of phase shift, if you will, to where the regulators are more willing to let utilities take risks, and utilities in turn are willing to take risks and make investments and try things that they wouldn't do. To get that done is really, really hard because particularly given we have a generation of regulators and utility folks who've had flat demand growth, right? You don't need to innovate or take many risks with flat demand. When all of a sudden somebody's showing up saying, I'd like to triple the size of your system in the next 5 years, that's a very different proposition and one that regulators have to grapple with and utilities. So if a utility comes and says, I'm willing to take more risk, you need to both reward me and realize that I've done that. That's a very hard conversation that I'm marginally hopeful can happen for us to meet the current challenge.
I love that. Go ahead.
I just wanted, it sounds like a great opportunity, Larry, for our task force huddle within WIRES to think about incentives to increase the capacity of the existing system. What if we can deploy new technologies, whether it's dynamic line ratings or this or that? And is there a way to incentivize utilities to do more of that? But thank you for the question.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Scotia. I appreciate that. And your perspective from FERC and listening, and we really appreciate that as well. What I'm hearing here is that if we can use existing sensors or existing processes, maybe utilities are more quick to adopt, because I've always heard, that utilities want cutting-edge technology that's been proven for 40 years, and we're in a race to be second, right? That's like what I learned growing up in the utility industry, and that's always been the challenge of being able to demonstrate that. But there's been a tremendous amount of work done in the area of physics, the corrosion, the even monitoring of extreme electrical transients, like high voltage transients, and the frequency of them. We know now what those can do to dielectric components. That's my background kicking in. And being able to utilize that, there's an opportunity to use existing sensors and existing processes to learn about the system and make more accurate and timely decisions about our assets. Other questions? Yeah, Carrie. Sure.
So you talked about it a bit, and Commissioner C mentioned leveraging asset extensions with our growth needs. A lot of times in companies, the asset management teams are much different than the planning and expansion team. So can you just talk a little bit about how we can leverage those synergies so that as we're protecting our assets or replacing them, we can accommodate some of the growth as well?
Excellent question. We are in this zone where integrated planning is paramount for us to build out our system. And by integrated planning, not just what's in, and FERC Order 1920 touches upon this. It acknowledges right sizing. It acknowledges scenario-based analysis. So now the role is on us to how do you incorporate that into our internal systems. When an engineer or a project manager comes to our internal committee asking for funding on building this project, we have a group of other committee members that represent those different organizations to say, wait a minute, did you consider this? Or have you upsized this? Or have you considered, downsizing it in some cases because it's unnecessary? So what we've done, at least at Eversource, is we've got internal committees that ensure that full spectrum of perspectives are achieved. The next tranche of challenges then explaining to stakeholders why we should be spending on those and why should we make those investments and kind of in some cases strategically right size. That was the first part of your question, right? You had something else in the, did I answer your question? Okay, great.
Let me give a contractor opinion on this question. We see it all the time with our customers, right? And don't take this the wrong way, but it could be very siloed inside a utility, right? The line design team has no interaction with the maintenance team, has limited interaction with the operations team. If you guys got the right set of folks from each of those teams in a room, Yahtzee, because the brain power there is amazing. But these folks are trying to solve problems in their little silos without even talking to each other. I've got a customer that we've been on system for a decade, and the line design team had no idea that we were collecting environmental readings at every structure. And it's like, guys, you could have built an entire asset map with risk grading at a structure level had you guys just talked to each other, right? And from a contractor side, we can't make you do that. We can just help educate and say, there's all this data, there's all this information. You guys need to collaborate internally and really challenge each other to solve this problem, right? Not in a vacuum, but together. You probably have half the answer already within your team. It's just how do you bring the right players together?
Well, it's been interesting. I've had the experience the last 12 months running around to every utility, IOU, public power, city-owned systems, and trying to evangelize for interregional transmission in the West. And I noticed about 6 months in, it depended on who I was talking to, the type of reception I got. Because if you went and talked to the transmission planning folks, much like, I mean, developers are easy, right? Developers are like, hey, let's build transmission. Like, let's go. But you go talk to an investor-owned utility, you go talk to public power, you talk to the transmission planning guys, and the engineers are like, oh God, we've needed this for 20 years. There's a line from here to here for 15 years that I can show my net power costs go down 2%. And I've told the finance people we should do it, and we never did it. So they're great. You go talk to the finance people, same thing. Say, hey, I'd love to give you a capital investment opportunity. What do you think of that? They're like, great. You go talk to the lawyers, and the lawyers will tell you 1,000 different reasons why none of this can ever happen and shouldn't happen. So maybe the moral of the story is if we kill all the lawyers in the utility industry, we'll actually finally get something built.
Wouldn't be many people in this room, I don't think.
Yeah.
I'm an engineer, so I think I'd be saved.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. So I'm really hearing that obviously it's the age-old collaboration. We need to make sure that all the stakeholders are represented in the process. And when we're really thinking about we need to begin with the end in mind, right? To quote one of my favorite authors, Stephen Covey, of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, beginning with that end in mind. What is the actual goal? And make sure the stakeholders are there. I love the way you have people representing the different stakeholders to give different ideas. That's fantastic. We have probably time for one more question before we do a lightning round of closing remarks. Any last questions, last burning questions? I don't want to overlook anyone. Well, if not, I really want to make sure that each of you have an opportunity, again, to have closing remarks. You come from different perspectives, right? The regulatory, the services, and the utility. Where do we go from here? How do we... Obviously, we're here communicating, we're trying to educate the industry, we're thinking about trying to free up capital by using capitalized life extension and upgrades from a capacity and resilience standpoint. Any closing remarks, Ben?
Yeah, I'm trying to reflect on the kinds of conversations we've had today. And it started off with, a lot of conversation on policies, and the policies are incentivizing us to build a system the right way. And then what are customers facing? They don't understand the cost of that build out. It's very societal. And the way the generation industry grew through competition is different from the way the transmission industry is going to need to grow. Transmission is a natural networked economy. And if any of the economists in the room, basic principles of network economics. If you build out the grid and the network, you have more positive externalities that benefit customers and suppliers. If you don't build out the grid, you have more negative externalities where you're going to increase cost to customers and suppliers. So there is a goodness to building the transmission grid in a very societal manner. And I think we need to appreciate that and try to focus on that element, because the faster we can do that, the more nodes you're going to have to grow the rest of the economy.
Right.
And just one more thought superimposing on that is investing in the transmission grid is also an insurance policy. The difference here is your premium is not just protecting you from reliability for today, it's giving you higher capacity, higher resilience, and higher ability to integrate clean energy in the future. So you're getting a multi-value proposition just from that insurance premium.
Right. And I was at NARIC when, I'm trying to remember if it was Tricia Pridemore interviewing, was it Calvin Butler? I'm trying to remember. I think it was Calvin Butler who says, and he's probably quoting somebody else, but we're the 5% of the GDP that's enabling the other 95%. And transmission is I love, you got some quotable quotes there in the whole societal benefit and the network economy. I really appreciate that. Over to you, Jose, closing remarks.
I'm very passionate about this problem.
Right.
I think about it all the time. I believe that every problem yields an opportunity, and I think we've got an opportunity to do something great. But it's going to take collaboration between everybody in this room, regulatory bodies, the investor-owned utilities, our legal contractor community. I think it's going to take all of us working together to really solve this problem. It is a challenge. We have an aging infrastructure problem, trying to battle a rapid load growth challenge, and working that in within long-term planning for these utilities, because they need long-term visions and strategies on how they're going to build this out. But I'm very excited about what we can do here, and I really do think we can reshape the grid for the future.
Thank you. Ray, bring us home.
Yeah, I'll answer it in a mildly abstruse academic way, which is transmission is a political economy problem, and there are many layers to that, right? Which is, there's a lot of coordination problems that come into being, but you ultimately need to build the political will to make it happen, right? So you need governors and the political class of the state and the region to be behind it, right? The current chair of the Washington Commission, who used to be at MISO, told me the story of the 5 governors in MISO who really got behind 15 years ago the first major transmission build out in MISO. So you need that political layer. You need regulatory institutions that support the building of transmission, right? Which means you need to create regulatory incentives, abandoned plant incentives, accounting orders, or deferred accounting, regulatory asset treatment for development costs that make transmission an attractive investment. And you need to bring the public along to show them we're building network benefits, right? I mean, the story, among the stories that are very hard to sell transmission in the West is all these states think you're building extension cords to California. And guess what's not popular in, say, Utah or Nevada or Arizona? An extension cord to California.
Right.
So you've got to build those various layers, and it's a challenge, but as was said, it's imperative to really meet what the public needs and what the country needs for the next phase of economic growth.
Well, thank you very much for that, and I think we're out of time. I just want to take a moment to thank our panel, and perhaps we could give them a round of applause.
Well, thank you, Ben, and thank you, panelists. And this brings our meeting to a close. I want to just mention we do have lunch available for everybody, so feel free to step out. Our next meeting for all of our members is going to be our spring meeting in 2026. It's April 29th and 30th. We will be at the Ritz-Carlton in Santa Barbara, so mark your calendars now, and look forward to seeing everyone there. So thank you all for being here, and looking forward to our next meeting. Bye.